So, despite some stonewalling, Betsy Devos is now our Secretary of Education. A few friends of mine, knowing I'm full aboard the Trump train, whoop woo, approached me over this because she's apparently, oh, so terrible. As such, let me give my opinions on Devos. 1. She reeks of the swamp to me. Yes, it's incredibly dubious that she donated $100,000 to the Make America #1 PAC and is now in a position of considerable power. That sounds like some pay-for-play shit. I admit, I was very unhappy when I heard that she was his pick. 2. She has pretty much zero education experience and zero practical experience. She has donated a lot of money, and she supports schools, and I suppose that on that level she knows how schools use money, which is better than nothing. It also indicates that she has a genuine interest in education reform. 3. Teacher unions despise her, and the 2 rhinos who tried to keep her out are probably in the pockets of said unions. That's a good thing, though, because teacher unions are cancer. 4. She's all about school choice, which admittedly I am too. I went to a charter school, and it was pretty great. I think if I hadn't gone there, otherwise I might have started to come to hate school, because I sure did before. I am all for charter schools, and particularly for more trade schools. We need more trade schools, and less emphasis on college as a necessity. Number 5. She plagiarized. Boo-hoo, sorry, but I just don't care about this. Look, she's not in grad school, okay? I really don't know why the left was so obsessed with this plagiarism thing. Why does it matter? Number 6, she was initially unclear on her views regarding Common Core, and although she says she's firmly against it, I am concerned about her commitment to its removal. And this is why I'm making this video. Truly, to explain why, if Devos removes Common Core standards, she will have granted a serious boon to the American education. What is the Common Core? It's a set of standards for education that was pushed hard by the Obama administration starting in 2009. Well, technically, every state can choose whether or not to adopt it. Of the 50, only 7 have elected not to. There must be a good reason, right? Well, first, the government funding goes to schools that meet the criteria for Race to the Top, which Common Core sure does. So yeah, more money is always good for schools, right? The Core also emphasizes that teachers and schools using a set of standards are still free to create their own curricula, as long as they meet said standards. The Core doesn't even come with a course curriculum. Those are produced by textbook companies, so school systems and educators can pick what works best for them. Okay? All sounds good. So just what are these standards based on, and why should the whole country adopt them? Well, they're based on rigorous, competitive, internationally benchmarked, hard research on childhood pedagogy. And the purpose of these new standards is to prepare students for college and ensure an equal education for everyone. Sounds great, right? Except for all of that is either a patent lie or a functional lie. So let's start with the patent one. That is that this shit was researched at all. Based on who you ask, there were supposedly hundreds of teachers, educators, and professors who worked together to write these standards. Dr. Sandra Stotsky, however, says she was one of only 2 content matter experts on K-12 pedagogy to serve on the writing team, both of whom refused to approve the standards. But the main thing here that interests me beyond this he said, she said about how many people were involved is that they're basically admitting no quantitative research was conducted, nor was any of this based on hard data, but rather by the collective opinions of somewhere between a handful and a gaggle of people. On the official website, they cite one study as a basis. It's called Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. And they also cite a framework from the National Assessment of Education Progress. But neither of these things are hard social science, educational, pedagogical research testing specifically these set of standards. They didn't take 2 classes, introduce Common Core standards to the one and not the other, conduct a longitudinal data collection process, and then statistically assess the results. That is called rigorous research. It follows the scientific method: observation, hypothesis, experimentation, reject or accept the null. That's it. That's rigorous research. This is a circle jerk. Also, Stotsky's not totally wrong. After all, one of the main writers, David Coleman, is not a teacher, and he has no freaking practical experience with K-12 education. Coleman is the president of College Board, an organization that is now producing a whole bunch of new Common Core compliant curriculums. No conflict of interest there, no sir. As I said though, ultimately it's not researched. It doesn't matter how many people you asked for opinions from. That's not testable data. And looking at the way twits like Jason Zimba, the lead mathematics contributor, reacted to very logical criticisms by Stotsky regarding lowering the definition of college readiness to refer only to readiness for community college-level institutions, certainly makes me wonder how much of those 1,000 researchers and teachers they listen to.
The definition of college readiness, I think it's a fair critique that it's a minimal definition of college readiness.
For some colleges.
Well, for the colleges most kids go to, but not that most parents probably aspire, right?
It's not for STEM. It's not for international
That's true. It's not only not for STEM, it's also not for selective colleges that, for example, UC Berkeley, even whether you're going to be an engineer or not, you'd better have pre-calculus to get into UC Berkeley, right?
But we have to think of our engineering colleges
and that's
scientific
That's true.
education.
I think the third pathway goes a lot towards that, but your issue is really broader than that.
Oh, yes.
So I just wanted to make sure that we got that out.
I'm not just thinking of selective colleges. There's a much broader question here.
That's right. It's both, I think, in the sense of being clear about what this college readiness does and doesn't get you, and that's the big subject.
But not to call something college ready when it only applies to a certain kind of college and a certain lower level of mathematical expertise that won't buy you far on the international market in most major disciplines of technology, economics, business, and so on.
Okay, thank you. That's fair.
Next, on to the functional lies, and how these weasels are avoiding any and all criticism with their copyrighted set of rules. Oh yes, that's right. The Common Core is copyrighted, which means you're not going to see any amendments to the current document, and individual states who adopt the core cannot make changes to the standard. So we've already established the dubious nature of these standards as actually being valuable, since they were founded on no hard data, but this means if schools find something doesn't work, oh well, you're stuck with it. But the core writers were very careful about this. Although the set of standards includes knowledge goals and testing, they are very quick to note that the core is not about content. As I said in the beginning, the content is created by textbook writers, not the immutable core. So when images like this started popping up all over the internet, the core writers leapt to say the core doesn't support it and the teacher or publisher is the one in the wrong. Let's look at this one. Jack used the number line to solve 427 minus 316, find his error, then write a letter to Jack telling him what he did right and what he should do to fix his mistake. And then a note from the father of the child who brought this assignment home, apparently a child on the autistic spectrum, by the way. Jack, don't feel bad. I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in electronic engineering, which included extensive study of differential equations and other higher math applications. Even I cannot explain the Common Core mathematics approach, not get the correct answer. In the real world, simplification is valued over complication. Therefore, 427 minus 316 equals 111. There. The answer is solved in under 5 seconds. 111. The process used is ridiculous and would result in termination if used. Sincerely, frustrated parent. In response to this, rather than admit the new method of teaching math is bizarre at best, Zimba just said, "That question would not be in a textbook if I wrote it." Good to know. So sure, teachers can choose their own curriculum, as long as it's from Common Core approved textbooks, like that one. Anytime someone points out the failures or struggles of the core, one of these three dinglings primarily behind it, Coleman, Zimba, or David Pook, comes out of the woodwork to blame any and all failings on anything apart from the standards themselves. And speaking of Pook...
Totally transparent, and I'm going to defer now to David and Bill.
I'm not paid to be here either. I'm just an interested teacher who helped write the standards. And the reason why I helped write the standards and the reason why I am here today is that as a white male in society, I'm given a lot of privilege that I didn't earn. And as a result, I think it's really important. I think it's really important that all kids get an equal opportunity to learn how to read. And I think I had this set of advantages as a result of who I was, not being any choice of mine. And when I walk into places like Roberto Clemente High School on the west side of Chicago, I think it's really important that those kids learn how to read just as well as I had the opportunity to read. And in creating an equitable
Koch, a guy who has come out against Dr. Sandra Strotsky for her criticisms of these standards, admits that he wanted to work on the Common Core because he believes white privilege is the reason white students tend to outperform Black and Hispanic students on standardized tests. Although we always conveniently forget about the Asians. As far as I'm concerned, that's an admission of a pretty succinct agenda at work. But hey, he probably means well, right? I mean, he just wants the Black kids to do as well as the whites. Well, Dave, what's an easier way to accomplish that? Is it A, fundamentally change inner-city Black culture, fix the Black family, encourage Black fatherhood, and once you've done that, raise them out of poverty? Or is it B, massively slow down education, create math aimed only at visual learners, we'll get into that, attempt to remove classic literature, and skew representations of history while sticking your fingers in your ears, shouting, "Not my core," every time you get called out? I think we have a winner, ding 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 ding. B is of course the way to go. So as I said at the top, the goal of this is to get more kids into college. Why would these self-hating white people want to get more kids into college, regardless of whether or not they're capable of completing college work or even want to? Indoctrination, that's why! Universities are hotbeds of extreme liberalism for a reason. In the 60s, the left lost the culture war, and they retreated to the ivory tower to slowly infest the system and disseminate cultural Marxist ideologies to young people. And if you're not the brightest bulb in the pack, pushed through an education system that has been catered to the lowest common denominator, with the idea of college attendance constantly shilled as the ultimate goal and outcome of your K-12 education, what kind of major might you pick? Engineering? You barely understand algebra, and look at how different the math is in college. No. You're going to get a liberal arts degree. African Studies sounds nice, and Professor Marx is going to dispense upon you his pure condensed ideology, ensuring another lifelong member of the Democratic Party who never questions anything. In a letter to Hillary Clinton from Mark Tucker, president of the National Center on Education and the Economy, in 1992, on the topic of education reform, he stated his goal for the American education system was to be, quote, a seamless web that extends from cradle to grave and is the same for everyone. Why is that starting to sound a little familiar here? Anyway, let's talk about these standards themselves. So the first thing about math. I'm a bit far removed from elementary arithmetic, but looking at these standards, I mean, third grade, let's see, they're expected to be able to multiply and divide numbers under 100. Maybe I'm misremembering. The under 100 thing seems odd to me, and that seems a little simplistic. Moreover, if you look at the higher grades, pre-calculus and trig are suspiciously absent. If you read their FAQ page, they skip around the fact that they apparently barely teach algebra. This is a 60-page report on the Common Core math standards, and this is the one page on algebra. Similarly, elsewhere, when it's mentioned in the document, it's almost always listed as preparing for algebra, which seems like strange language to me. It seems like you're really not trying to teach algebra. You're trying to take it back so that geometry is the highest form of math we get to in high school. But what most people talk about when they talk about Common Core is its crazy math problems. I'm trying to be fair here. From what I can tell, most of the change in the way that math is being taught is to create visual representations of numbers using sets of 10 and breaking down numbers into their component parts. Apparently, children are eventually taught standard notation, but I'm interested in just how well that will turn out in a few more years down the line when these kids have had every single math lesson they've learned in school suddenly now replaced with something that looks inevitably as foreign to them as these questions look to us. I mean, that's why there are so many top 10 dumbest Common Core questions listicles. Because as adults who have grown up using the same standard notation for mathematics that the world's been using for, at least the last couple hundred years, or these seemingly intentionally confusing changes to the typical arithmetic lexicon. Oh no, I'm having a math situation! So, we know that the people behind this aren't the biggest fans of white people, and the goals are to put all the kids on a level playing field so that they all go to college, rack up enormous debt with their women's studies degrees, and become lifelong Democrat voters through liberal college indoctrination. Because of all that, I would bet good money, and I have no proof, but I would bet good money that this visual talk-it-out method of teaching mathematics is absolutely coming from the perspective that minorities are slow, visual-only learners who perform poorly on standardized tests because the standard way everyone on the planet does math is a result of the evil white patriarchy. So we're gonna decolonize math and make it easy for brown people. Of course, that is a horrifically racist way to think, but since this is to put everyone on the same playing field in their own statement of purpose, wait, doesn't that sort of imply that's what they're actually admitting to doing? Changing math into this incomprehensible bundle of jargon and bizarre coloring activities is somehow going to allow inner-city black kids to finally perform as well as suburban whites? All they needed to succeed is a picture of some trucks instead of a ruler! And by the way, since I'm railing on it, I understand that this might actually make math easier for some learners. A lot of these are sort of mental tricks for doing math spelled out. But the insistence that this is the only method, that's why I'm annoyed. But it's fine as long as it's helping kids learn, right? Oh wait, except that doesn't appear to be the case. Kentucky, which adopted the Common Core standards early on, reported in their 2014 to 2015 review that the gap between white and black test scores on their Explore and Plan readiness tests, which are comparable to the ACT with high reliability, actually increased since the adoption of the program. And where did they increase the most? Math, with the gap widening by 3.7% in the 2 years since the adoption of Common Core. Additionally, black students' performance declined in 5 of the 8 categories from the 2012 testing. So maybe blacks aren't so fucking stupid you need to teach them with these inane word puzzles, eh? Almost like it's a cultural issue, or a class issue, and not a racial one, you racist ass clowns. I swear, the way these people try to treat blacks like mental toddlers while decrying Western civ as racist is just mentally excruciating to process. So, what's their reaction to this clear evidence that dumbing down all the curriculum into nonsense doesn't help minorities? Do they change the obviously flawed system? Of course not. Like I said, they can't even if they wanted to. What's happening instead is that the ACT is just going to stop performing the Explore and Plan readiness tests. And you can't stop there. Because math is so racist against blacks, the SAT has also been revised in the last few years to reflect this new retarded, and I mean that in every sense of the word, education system. Unfortunately, they can't get rid of the ACT itself or just pretend college readiness is going up. And what have we seen? The numbers of students prepared for college have stagnated, and the percentages in some categories have even dropped. According to an ACT report in 2015, only 40% of test takers had strong college readiness. Astoundingly, blacks and Hispanics often have even lower percentages. In Kentucky, it's 5% and 14% respectively. Sure looks like it's working. Oh, and by the way, that 40% has actually even gone down in the last year. The most recent study shows it's now about 38% overall are ready to go to college. Oh, that's just peachy, isn't it? Your stupid system is making the kids stupid, but instead of admitting fault, just cover it up and pretend everything's fine. Oh, and why is it fine? Because it's designed to help minorities and erase American history, and that makes it a pro-social force of good, regardless of the results, because we're the left, and sticks and stones may break our bones, but words are the only frickin' thing that matter. So, with that in mind, how was this failure handled specifically in Kentucky? Why, the head of the State Board of Education suggested colleges remove remedial courses, so students who aren't prepared for college can just go straight into a course anyway, with full accreditation. In other words, these kids aren't prepared for college, but just accept them anyway. Oh, and speaking of history, let's talk about that. Let's look at this AP History Manual under Common Core guidelines. So I read the whole dang thing, well, I skimmed it, and I'll give you my impressions. Lots about women, lots about minorities, lots about the poor worker, and very, very little about anything else. George Washington is mentioned in reference to his farewell address calling for unity. That's pretty much it. I would point out that almost to my surprise, Lincoln gets mentioned a lot, and they even have the nerve to admit he was a Republican. I thought they weren't fellating Lincoln anymore because he was a straight white male. I particularly was amused because I noticed this specific mention of Jackson founding the Democrats, and the preponderance of bits about racist Southern slave owners, yet conveniently no mention of Jackson owning plenty of slaves and treating them worse than animals. Whoops. Anyway, so at this point I had to scan the whole document. I'll throw up some pieces that I found interesting or obnoxious. Here's just an entire page about Native Americans. Most of the pages look more like this than not, by the way. Who's this woman, for example? Even I don't know who she is. Uh-oh, I guess I need to be re-educated. Send me to the camps. Look, it's not like I'm saying you shouldn't be teaching these things to high schoolers, but it shouldn't be 90% of the material. World War II is covered in 4 of these little blocks, and they don't even mention their main man, Adolf! And one of those 4 blocks is about the Japanese internment. I mean, just look at how pervasive the influence of this politically correct narrative is. Oh, God. It's just dripping with it. Oh, but this shit isn't even the most egregious part. No, that actually came at the beginning of the semester. Guess that when you start going strong, sometimes you taper off. So this whole thing is broken into 9 sections, right? It's 1491 to 1607, 1607 to 1754, 54 to 1800, 1800 to 1848, 48 to 77, 65 to 98, 90 to 1945, 45 to 80, and 80 to present. So 2.5 sections about pre-US North America and an AP US history course. Okay, yeah, I can see justifying that, actually. And of course, like the rest, about 80 to 90% of the content revolves around women, natives, blacks, slavery, and the evil white Europeans oppressing them. Of course, in contrast, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Founding Fathers are less than footnotes. The only 2 who even get a mention are Washington and Franklin. And I mean, because they're white men, that's just not in the interest of the authors of this dreck. But as the Common Core cronies will be quick to point out, but Aiden, the Common Core isn't curriculum, when we don't want it to be, so this document in no way is endorsed or representative of core standards. Sure, fine. In fact, the reason I'm only reading this one is because it was so bad that a North Carolina school district refused to teach it since it failed to meet the state standards for a history course. So it made some headlines and I got to see it. So who knows what the average course looks like then? But you know who produced this document? Yeah, David Coleman's organization, College Board. Coleman, one of the lead writers of Common Core. This is the version of US history he put his seal of approval on. And it's not just College Board. A representative from Pearson Education, another company publishing Common Core approved textbooks, had this to say about their AP history text.
So you mean the Apple? The Apple? No, Common Core, just Common Core. Oh, I think Common Core is really important because it needs to have some cohesion between the states. And Texas keeps screwing it up
And Washington.
Texas got upset about it, and they wanted to have their founders. They want to pound the founders in, and it's like, come on. The dead white guys did not create this country. It was a whole bunch of different kinds of people. And yes, there were women, and yes, there were people of color, and yes, and you need to talk about them too. But they want to talk about those dead white guys.
I got it.
They don't agree with Islam, so they want the kids to know about it. They don't agree with birth control, so they don't want the kids to talk about it. They don't agree with math because they don't understand it. It's not the same math that they did in high school, so they don't want the kids to know about it. People who say that they want to teach the Constitution, they want to teach the part of the Constitution that they like.
Second Amendment.
Teach all of it. Damn Second Amendment. Damn Second Amendment. Damn Second Amendment.
As a note about this video, the woman, Kim Korber, was fired as a result of it. I'm always skeptical of Veritas because they've pulled some fast ones in the past, but this one does appear legit. So, as I said a while back, at least in the case of Kentucky, the minority students that this plan is so clearly aimed at didn't just perform worse in math, but in numerous subjects. The smallest of this new widening gap, however, was in English, so let's talk about English. According to the standards, English should be 50% reading and 50% writing. Okay, so just what are they reading with this time they're not spending learning the complexities of English grammar? According to the core, reading is to be mostly informational and non-fiction, particularly in early grades. In essence, classical literature is out because it's oppressive and written by big bad white men, although I read Bronte and Plath in school and They're at least not men. But apparently that's the thing keeping kids out of college, the fiction, and that's the core's excuse for this focus on informational and nonfiction reading. Although that is, like all things involved in this mess, completely unsubstantiated and based on zero peer-reviewed data. Now, the core does include a list of acceptable reading material, which contains many classic works of literature. However, as we've seen, the main core itself will act as an exemplar of how these standards should be, but will dismiss and disavow how they are actually being implemented. For example, the New York Daily News took a look at the New York City Department of Education webpage called Tasks, Units, and Student Work, which provides resources, activities, and handouts for educators. I've tried to investigate the website myself, but the site is apparently hosted on a toaster hooked up to a makeshift generator in Nepal. And this article is from 2003, so some things may have changed, but at the time, they reported that of all of the materials listed on this website for high school level English, only 3 pieces of literature were actually included: Romeo and Juliet, The Hollow Men, and a short poem about Gandhi by Langston Hughes. Like I said, this is old and I can't verify it, so take it with a grain of salt. But regardless, by their own standards, upper high school courses are intended to be 70% informational or nonfiction. The writers of the standards defend this by pointing out that there's a footnote that explicates that this 70% should be throughout all courses. Yeah, a footnote. Is that anything beyond plausible deniability? To me, it sounds like English has just been transformed into social studies, and that would be in line with the founders' white guilt wanting to erase Western civilization. And again, when they get called out, they just accuse teachers, schools, and publishers of the errors for misunderstanding the standards. Finally, I have some general concerns about how politics can be easily loaded into this system, knowing the purpose for which it exists, people who wrote the list of standards, and the fact that those same people are often, ultimately, behind the texts that end up being taught in schools. There is a clear agenda, as I believe I have explicated, in the people behind this program. And as such, it's not so hard to believe that that agenda could possibly show up in the material itself, is it? Now, I can neither confirm nor verify any of the images I'm about to throw up, with some exceptions. For example, this book about social studies is absolutely real. Oh, and this one. And this one. Jesus. But this right here, folks, this is the other reason why a lot of people, particularly conservatives, are concerned about the Common Core. So have a look and judge for yourselves. So there you have it. Common Core. As Devos said in her official statement, it's a federalized boondoggle, and I personally believe it should be removed and that education should be handled more on the state level. So whatever your stance on Devos, let's just hope she gets rid of this mess. And regardless of my own numerous apprehensions about her, if she can do that, she'll be in my good graces. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.